Printing money is bad,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's inflationary.
Mm-hmm.
But borrowing printed money is insane. And this is the thing to look back. Look back at the J.P. Morgan earnings and look back at the Goldman earnings and the Citigroup earnings
In
and
the,
Bank
in
of.
the 2008, 2009, they
Yeah,
were paying big bonuses and
they
stuff.
were raking money in hand over fist.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Well, because the banks sold their mortgage-backed securities to the Federal Reserve. The very same securities that weren't worth 30 cents on the dollar moments before
Wow.
were suddenly worth full face value. So, and it replicated, it's been done so many times. You'd go back to the Revolution and you find Alexander Hamilton and his boys, people that sponsored him as well as his circle of friends, the elite as we call them today,
Mm-hmm.
were buying up IOUs from the Continental Congress that soldiers had taken for their pay,
Yeah.
that people had taken for supplies that they gave to Congress and so forth to prosecute the war. And Alexander Hamilton and his cronies were fanning the post roads of the nation, buying these things for as little as 10 cents on the dollar,
Really?
knowing
Because these guys knew that nobody else, they were going to be worthless. Well, that's what
everybody
they were
thought they were
told.
going to be worthless.
That's what they were told.
That was the
The
meme. See,
meme.
at the time, obviously, not worth a Continental, right?
Uh-huh.
Wagon loads of money can scarcely buy wagon loads of goods. This was the meme. So the reinforcing a meme in the media of the day, which were simple newspapers published by the same folks.
Hmm.
You know, the idea that the money powers took over the newspapers is so well documented. All you have to read is the Federalist Papers or the Anti-Federalist debates, and you find that, of course, they pooled their money and bought the newspapers so they could tell the people what to think. How unusual. Anyway, into the newspapers went the story about how all these debts were worthless and they were never going to be paid. And so then folks sold them. You remember the mortgage-backed securities?
Sure.
Oh, they're
Same
bad,
thing.
they're worthless, they're no good. And people were selling them for 30
30
cents on the
cents on
dollar.
the dollar.
And in the case of the Continentals, 10 cents on the dollar. And then all the while, those folks knew that once they had amassed these piles of defaulted debt,
Yeah.
that the Congress or the Federal Reserve or both
Mm-hmm.
were going to make them good.
For 100 cents on the dollar.
That's exactly what happened.
What they did in
The
2008.
assumption of debts in 1794 or 93 and what they did in 2008, exactly parallel. So all of the speculators that bought these worthless securities, remember that's what the papers are telling us, they're worthless securities, they reaped benefits beyond belief. And of course, the rich got richer and the poor owed more. That's the
Fascinating.
oldest game ever.
And just to add insult to injury, this is the cherry on the top. So what you've taught us is, for example, say Wells Fargo had $1 billion worth of mortgage-backed securities. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York, which is partially owned by,
Wells Fargo.
Wells Fargo, creates the money and gives it back to themselves.
In exchange for the mortgage-backed securities,
securities
which now sit on the
And they gave them 100
books.
cents on the dollar that they were only worth 30 cents because they were,
face value.
wow.
So I have
Now that's legal, right?
It is.
Come on.
I have the H41 from last week. Remember we did it
Oh, yeah.
where
I
we looked
need to
last
pull
week.
up mine up, yeah.
Yeah, and federal mortgage-backed securities. $1.768 trillion.
To this day, they still got them on
An
there.
additional $5 billion purchased this week.
Really? They're still buying them.
They're still buying.
So they're still doing these mortgage-backed securities. They
Yes.
haven't changed.
That's right. Yeah, if you look at a year ago,
Amazing.
and remember we have that great column, week ending March 16th, 2016, mortgage-backed securities were, we're $12,808 higher, $12,808,000,000 higher than we were last year at this time. So as of today, they own $12 billion more than they owned last year at this same time.
Which they bought from themselves, essentially.
Well,
essentially.
yeah.
So,
And I
but
hate
we
to
have
say
no
it, but
idea.
that's what keeps the mortgage market going.
Uh-huh.
If, this idea and this talk
Really?
today
Wow.
about the Fed unwinding its balance sheet. Have you heard this
Of
talk?
course, that would be they have 4.5 trillion worth of paper on their balance sheet, like these mortgage-backed securities. They would get rid of them somehow.
Sell them
Well,
off.
who's going to buy them?
Well, whoever does buy them, they're going to demand a much higher interest rate than they currently yield.
Yeah.
And they're certainly going to crowd out the federal government, which has enormous borrowing needs just to meet its bills. So you have $2.3 trillion in bonds, bills, and notes, and $1.7 trillion in mortgage backed securities. That's a lot of trillions to unload onto the unsuspecting investing public.